So in session 3, I'll tell you all about non-probability sampling methods. And non-probability sampling methods are methods in which the chance or probability of selecting one particular member or unit from the population into the sample is unknown. So the selection in these methods is not based on fairness or equal chance or randomness. They're based on other criteria, other factors such as convenience, judgments, referrals, and quotas. So by consequence, samples generated by non-probability sampling methods are usually not representative, but they're still used very often because they're simply much faster and cheaper. So decision makers often want fast, relatively inexpensive answers, and in that case, it's easier to do non-probability sampling method than a probability sampling method. So let's start with the first one, convenience sampling. Convenience sampling is, like the word says, very convenient and fast. It is not the most rigorous way of sampling. It basically comes down to take whatever you can get. So it's kind of like always swiping right on Tinder, regardless of who it is. Or just taking whichever member of the population is most inconvenient to include in your sample. Think of, for example, if you are an SDSU student, it's easiest for you to do research among other SDSU students, simply because it's more convenient to reach those people. They're already in your circle. So the downside of this, or the potential bias, is that you could inadvertently exclude infrequent or non-users of certain platforms or certain apps and so on. So the Tinder example, if someone, obviously everyone on Tinder is not a representation, not a valid representation of, let's say, the whole US population or the whole world population. So anyone who's not on Tinder has no chance of being selected in your sample if you take a sample of Tinder users. Same with SDSU students, for example. If you want a representative sample of US college students, but you gather that sample only at SDSU, then anyone who's not attending SDSU is automatically excluded from your sample. So in that sense, convenience sampling is really not representative. Sometimes we also call it an accidental sample because you just go based on who you can almost conveniently or accidentally include in your sample. The second type of non-probability sampling methods is judgment sampling. And judgment sampling is sometimes called purposive sampling or exemplar sampling, and it requires some sort of educated guess, so a sort of judgment in terms of who would be a good person to include in your sample. So it's still very subjective because certain members will have a smaller chance of selection than others. Think of, for example, qualitative research. Let's say you want to do a focus group and you choose participants based on an educated guess. Let's say you do a focus group about a new type of protein powder or any type of, let's say, a vegan food supplement, and you think, who would be great to include in my focus group? So you start looking for people that are fit, that are active, that are more likely to use that specific supplement, and you go recruit them in a gym. So in that case, honestly, your sample is not going to be much better than if you were to use convenience sampling, but you add an extra layer of at least an educated guess where you try to get people that you feel would be relevant for your research project. Referral sampling is the next type, and that's a really interesting one because it's a great way to find people from specific subgroups that you may otherwise not have access to. So it's also called snowball sampling for that very reason. Let's say, for example, you are studying something related to environmental engineering. So you want to get a sample of environmental engineers, but you only know maybe like 2 from your sorority. And the best thing you can do is then just ask them to give you some referrals to other people that they know in their circles, in their classes, so you can get sufficient amount of people that actually meet that criteria of being a student in environmental engineering or being an environmental engineer. So in that case, you do still have that bias of potentially excluding members that may not be in an inner circle of people. So members of a population that are maybe less known or generally not liked, that are a bit out of the circle, that are less social, may not end up in your sample simply because they may not be reached out to, or they may feel intimidated to respond and so on. So you don't really have a valid representation of whichever target audience you're really looking for. And then lastly, quota sampling. So with quota sampling, again, it's kind of like a way to patch up other research methods or other sampling methods, if you will, based on certain quota. So let's say you do convenience sampling, but you want to set specific quota or specific rules in terms of specific characteristics that need to be represented in your sample. Let's say you want, for example, a convenience sample with at least 50% males, 50% females, certain percentage of different ethnicities, and so on. So this is actually a method that is very often used by mall intercept studies, where they want to find a balance between certain characteristics, certain screening criteria, or quota we call them. So it's often used as a way to adjust or improve convenience samples.